Americans discard nearly 40 million tons of food per year and throw out 40% of uneaten food per person. It doesn't take much deliberation to know that this is outrageous and needs to be stopped. So, how can we prevent the continuation of this self destruction and use it for good? One way is mandated composting. A huge part of this problem is the fact that when we throw out food, it is forced to decompose anaerobically, without air. When food decomposes anaerobically, it causes methane, an extremely environmentally harmful gas. Composting prevents and/or reduces methane when organic matter decomposes aerobically and could greatly reduce not only the unhealthy effects of food waste, but put the food to good use and make it into soil. Another way to prevent our wasting patterns that also tackles another extreme issue is donating food waste to food insecure homes. Food insecure homes are homes where healthy food or food at all is not guaranteed. Organizations like 412 Food Rescue, Boston Area Gleaners, Boulder Food Rescue, and Community Plates strive to do just that, located all around America. To really fix this problem, we need to majorly reconstruct the systems of food production and access and the social systems of food in the USA. The world deserves justice, and we need to challenge ourselves and our ways to do better for our home, Earth.
Public service announcement about all the food waste that we produce. 40% of the food that is produced in America is never eaten. Each American wastes on average about 15 to 20% of the food we buy. But why do we have so much food waste? There are many reasons why we have this large amount of food waste, but there are a few main reasons. We are very picky when buying our food. Someone would rather buy a nice looking fruit or vegetable rather than one that might not look as pretty. Because of this, farmers and stores just throw out a lot of food because they think it won't be bought, even though it's still wasting. Similarly, we are more likely to buy a product if stores have a lot of it. So if stores have a lot of apples sitting right next to each other, you are more likely to buy it than if there was just one apple on the shelf. This idea is called overstocking, which leads to food waste because they will have food sitting on the shelves that they know will not be eaten. It is only there to get people to buy it. Instead of buying the right amount of food that will actually be bought, they are buying too much food, which means that all the rest goes in the trash. You might be thinking, can't they just donate the food? It actually costs a lot of money to donate food because you need trucks and people to move it around. For stores, all of the costs just aren't worth it. The USDA also has different types of food, number 1 and number 2. Number 2 food, even though it tastes just as good, is not valued the same. Also, the sell-by date makes people feel like their food is bad even though it might not be. The sell-by date is the manufacturer's best guess on when the food will go bad. A company might put a sell-by date on the product to be a little earlier than when it will actually go bad, because that means that you will have to get a new product before the old one is bad. Another major contributor to food waste is in restaurants. Restaurants normally give you more food than you will eat. This leaves the restaurant with a lot of food at the end of the day that they will have to throw out. A restaurant also does not know what people are going to order. If a restaurant serves chicken and fish, then they will probably order more chicken and fish than they will need to make sure that they don't run out of one option. If a lot of people at the restaurant order chicken, then they will be left with a lot of extra fish, and after a few days, they'll have to throw it out. It might seem like there's nothing good, but some restaurants are making a difference. There are a few zero-waste restaurants that do not produce any waste. There are also many ways we as individuals can reduce our food waste. We can start by only buying the food we are going to eat and not using food based on if it looks perfect. We can also start growing our own food. If we were able to grow some of our own food, then we would be able to skip all of the steps that food has in order to get to you. We would be able to skip all of the trucks and unnecessary stops, which would make the food fresher and eliminate all of the unnecessary carbon emissions. Obviously, we can't grow apple trees in our homes, but we can grow apple trees in gardens and other places. Then all we would have to do is walk a little bit to get fresh food. We could grow food like basil in our apartments, which would really reduce our food waste. Like people in the 1800s reconstructed after the Civil War, we need to reconstruct our ways of getting food in modern times to be able to live better lives. During Reconstruction, they rebuilt the U.S. to make it fair for people of all different backgrounds. At least they tried to. We need to tear down our beliefs about food and make it more efficient and give us new ways. If we keep wasting all the food than we do now, we will be producing so much methane, which is causing climate change. Food waste doesn't only waste food, it wastes water also. Food waste ends up wasting over a quarter of our water supply. All of this waste could be used for many other better alternatives. When food is disposed, it starts to produce a lot of methane, which is a greenhouse gas with 21 times global warming potential. All in all, we start trying to waste less food and grow our own food, then our planet will be better off. Thank you for listening.
This topic is about food waste and how we could stop it. Food waste is one of the big problems right now because it impacts the environment by producing a lot of methane. In the United States, 40% of food grown or raised is not eaten. That is pretty shocking, especially when you consider that nearly 1 in 6 Americans is food insecure. However, there is a solution to reduce food waste. One of the solutions is not to buy too much food that you know you are not going to finish. For example, buy the right amount of food that you need. You need to keep track of how much food you are throwing out and why. This helps you determine what you're wasting and what you can do about it. Another solution is you could spread the word by telling other people how and why they should stop food waste. You could freeze your food in your refrigerator. For example, freezing your food will make your food expire more slowly. The third solution is to volunteer in food waste organizations. Hundreds of food waste organizations are actively working to help stop food waste right now. If you have time, volunteering is a great way to have an impact on reducing food waste. That was the end of my food waste presentation. Thank you for watching.
What is food waste? Food waste is food that is not eaten. Food waste is a major problem in the United States. Over 40% of food produced is thrown out. North America wastes more food than any other place in the whole world. Why is food waste a problem? When food gets thrown out, it starts to decompose anaerobically or without air. When food decomposes anaerobically, it creates methane gas, which is a major factor in global warming. How can we minimize food waste? We can minimize food waste by using our table scraps for compost. Another way to minimize food waste is to eat everything that is on your plate, and if you are full, take it home and eat it as leftovers the next day. The following video does a very good job of explaining this.
In 2017, we generated 810 million kilograms of food waste. That's equivalent to 2 bowls of food per person per day. Food is wasted when we order portions that are too large, have too many dishes, and when over-catering for parties and events. Here are 3 tips to reduce food waste. 1. When eating out, order only what you can eat. 2. Always start with less. And if there are leftovers, pack them home. 3. When catering for parties or events, it is often safe to order 10 to 15% less than the number of expected guests. Follow these quick tips to reduce food waste. Love your food. Waste less, save more. Learn how to reduce food waste at cgs.sg.
As we saw in the video, there are many ways to minimize food waste, even if it is a small change like ordering less than usual. These small changes will still help greatly in the future. As we've seen, food waste is not just a problem of throwing out food that others could eat. It's also linked to global warming and potentially many worse things. Please consider cutting down on food waste so we can keep living on our lovely planet.
131 billion pounds. $161 billion. That's a lot, wouldn't you agree? Those numbers are a representation of how much food America wastes every single year. 30 to 40% of food purchased gets thrown out, into the trash, straight to landfills, to produce greenhouse gases that will only further damage the planet. So how do we stop it? One strategy that is rapidly gaining popularity is composting. Composting is the process of taking food scraps such as eggshells, corn on the cob, or any leftover food that isn't eaten or can't be saved and putting it in a mechanism called a composter. A composter is a large cylindrical container with 2 sides. On one side, you put in the food scraps, close the lid, and rotate it. It traps a lot of heat, bacteria, and sometimes even insects in it, which will all help the food break down at a faster pace. It will naturally start to break down and turn into something that will look a lot like soil. After roughly 2 to 3 weeks of continuously adding food scraps, it'll all shrink down to a substance that looks like dirt. You then move it to the other side of the composter where you don't add any more food scraps, simply let it cook. You need to continue to rotate it daily. The entire process of making your own compost takes about 2 to 3 months to get the first usable batch, and from then on you'll have more every single week. Another option is bringing your food scraps to a farmer's market or a designated compost drop-off area. But what is the benefit of composting? You can add a nutrient-rich substance to plants and it will fertilize them, replacing chemicals that could otherwise be used, promoting growth. Another way of reducing food waste is by buying imperfect produce. So much produce is thrown out every single day just because it's not as pretty looking. But that doesn't mean that it's not just as delicious as any other fruit or veggie. Companies such as Bad Apple Produce save the produce that grocery stores reject because of their looks and sell them to consumers. But what if you can't access any fresh produce? What if the grocery stores near you don't have fresh fruits and vegetables, only canned ones? This is called a food desert. A food desert is a place where you have to travel far distances to access fresh food. Food deserts are very heavily correlated with your socioeconomic status. Urban neighborhoods with predominantly black and brown residents statistically have less selection and are more likely to have more unhealthy foods which malnourishes residents. More affluent neighborhoods are correlated with having more selection, more supermarkets, and having primarily white residents. This is such a big problem all over the world, and one that hopefully we can find a solution to very soon.
The entire school at the West community, we waste a lot of food in just lunch alone. You must be asking, how much is home lunch and school lunch we are wasting? The thing is, people throw away their food that they don't want or that they don't have time to eat. It is a really big problem. So we need to find a way to fix this problem. Like the whole school community, like every school in New York City, like public schools alone, waste 1.9% of food waste around in the whole country alone. There's like 36.5 pounds of food per student per year. This problem could help millions of people who don't have food across the country. These problems are very bad if you don't have a solution. Some solutions that we could work on is wasting less food and to teach the students and to influence them how to create better habits for the future. So we need to provide a better opportunity. This solution could make food waste go down by a significant amount. So if we did it, we'll save so much money on food and we could give those extra foods that we don't need to people who don't. That is how you save food in our school, and that's what we need to do if we want to save less food. Thank you for watching my documentary.
All over the world, there are people suffering from a lack of food in their community. For instance, many people buy more food than is needed and end up throwing much of it to waste. As a matter of fact, according to the New York Times, over a third of food in the world inevitably goes to waste. Even though you might think that food waste doesn't affect you, it probably does. Other than supporting your community and people of low income, reducing food waste also reduces methane emissions, conserves energy and resources, and saves money for you. Instead of trying to prevent this problem for the better well-being of everyone, society continuously buys more food than needed and ends up wasting it. The amount of food that we waste has tripled over the past 50 years, making it grow at a faster rate than our population. The truth is that it won't stop increasing until we put a plan into action. It often feels that us as individuals can't do much, however, that is hardly the case. Rather than throwing out food that you won't eat before it goes bad, restaurants, grocery stores, and families should donate to the hungry and financially unstable. Secondly, families can decide together what they will eat each day and pre-plan meals so that they won't have any extra food left over once it already goes bad. Once they go to the grocery store, they will already know exactly what and how much of it they will need. Additionally, you can even help reduce food waste at restaurants by asking about portion size, and if it seems that it will be too big, requesting to reduce it. These are just a few free options. However, you can also go to rescuingleftovercuisine.org and donate just $5 and help those who are food insecure. Though it might seem impossible now, if enough people acknowledge this problem and take the steps to help it, we can make food waste numbers go down for the better.
Hello, my name is Bria Smalls, and today we will be talking about the nourishment of our society and how it has been affected negatively and positively. This year in 2020, we went through a mass lockdown all over the world because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the lack of leadership that our previous president, Donald J. Trump, has shown, specifically by the lack of resources he failed to provide for those in need. Because of the lockdown, the economy had a major downfall statistically. But in the process, our climate has definitely improved. Because oil and industrial activities have dropped, carbon dioxide emission levels in our atmosphere have also decreased, but which in result, global warming has slowed down. But because of new COVID regulations, specifically wearing a mask, our oceans have become polluted from plastic use. We also went through a complete economic shutdown, which caused a lot of crisis for women, people of color, lower income families, etc. When COVID was at its peak, our government had to put all non-essential businesses down, so many people who depended on the profits from mass production suffered, especially if they had a low wage. In the process, many were at risk of homelessness, lack of resources, etc., since they couldn't provide all of the money they depended on. Since the higher class could actually afford and survive the living expenses the government was giving, they weren't really affected negatively since they live off a capitalist system. The pandemic also affected education for less fortunate schools since everything was online. The transition from in-person to remote learning was extremely difficult for not many kids, but for me myself, because people had minimal access to Wi-Fi and if not technology. It added a lot of extra stress for people graduating that year, so a lot of kids fell behind, mostly because they felt the work was too much to handle and the environment they had to work through wasn't suitable. Therefore, many people in our education system fell behind drastically, causing a lack of nourishment for the society of the graduating class.
Hi, I'm Gemma Graham, and today I'm going to be talking about food waste and how you can access food during a global pandemic. New Yorkers are struggling with food insecurity every day. This means people who can't provide food on the table for their families. How can we prevent this? We can try to limit food waste. We can start to do this by composting, freezing leftovers, or the food we buy and aren't going to use right away. From the beginning of March, a global pandemic hit us and took over our everyday lives. We were under a lockdown and couldn't go out unless for necessities. Children couldn't attend school, and adults couldn't go to work. We had to quarantine for 7 months, and accessing food was one of the biggest challenges we faced. Instant foods like pasta, rice, mac and cheese, etc., were quickly disappearing. Have you ever seen plants growing on top of rooftops? Well, that's called urban gardening. What about plants growing in water without soil? It's called hydroponics. Hydroponics and urban gardening help each other out a lot. For example, when urban gardening uses hydroponics, it uses 90% less water and less space, and it's because it's indoor gardening.
America has a long and sad history of oppressing Black people and other people of color. Even after the emancipation of slaves, Black people were oppressed. Most people think it's just oppression of voting rights and lack of opportunity. But there is more basic type of oppression, one that impacts that basic need to have nourishment. The lack of empathy for the situation that Black and other people of color find themselves in during the pandemic is a terrible shame of our nation. According to City Harvest, an organization that helps feed people struggling with food scarcity, in NYC, over 1.5 million New Yorkers are struggling to feed themselves now. This is a 38% increase over pre-COVID-19 figures. But we can do something on a local basis to help people right in New York City. We have the ability to reduce food waste and donate it to food banks for communities like the East Tremont section of the Bronx. We can donate food to the Grace Church, which has a food bank serving that community. We will not stop there. We should use our scientific knowledge to teach and train the people in neighborhoods like East Tremont how to create a hydroponic farming. This will help solve the lack of nourishment in these communities. Actions like this will not only help stem the tide of people not having food to eat, but bring people of different backgrounds together, united in providing equity to all. Think globally and act locally.
Going home, doing work, and then eating a nice big dinner is the normal routine for a lot of people. But in NYC alone, 1.1 million people are food insecure. 1.1 million people go home unsure if they will be able to eat dinner. Why are so many people unable to get enough food to eat? One reason is because of food waste. You know when you go to a buffet and you pile as much food onto your plate as you can, but end up throwing at least half of it away? You might think throwing away the food you didn't eat is harmless, but what you throw away contributes to the 80 billion pounds of food the US throws out each year. A recent impact on food insecurity is the current global pandemic, COVID-19. COVID shut down the whole world, causing lots of stores, businesses, and companies to close down. This resulted in many people losing their jobs. Only 6 months into the nationwide pandemic, New York had lost 1 million jobs. So there's about 1 million extra people who are unemployed and not getting an income. With no income, people are not able to afford essentials, including food. On top of that, food prices for food consumed at home have increased by 5.6%. Some foods that have had the highest spike in prices are beef and veal, which went up by 25.1%. Now prices are higher than ever, but there are 1 million people who have just lost their job. Food insecurity is clearly a major problem many New Yorkers are facing, so how do we work to solve it? We can start off small, like by making sure to only put small amounts of food on our plates so that it doesn't end up getting thrown away. Or, when shopping in the grocery store, we can take the last items on the shelf so that it doesn't end up getting wasted. There are also many organizations and websites that you can donate to. The foodhelp.nyc campaign provides a map with 420 food pantries and 112 soup kitchens across all 5 boroughs. These food pantries then supply people in need with food. We cannot do this alone. People need to come together, no matter who we are, to stop food insecurity in NYC. Remember, you can make a difference.
Food insecurity is a term of when families are in need of food, but they don't have enough money for it. As we all know, food waste is one of major problems in the US and other countries. In America, while some people and families have the ability to eat and throw out food they didn't finish, other families are starving because they can't afford food. Statistics show that 40% of food does not get eaten and that 10.5% of Americans are food insecure. Deformed fruits and vegetables constantly get wasted, even though they are completely edible, and vegetables are the most wasted type of food. Some supermarkets tried to solve the problem, and here are some methods they came up with. Supermarkets display and actively sell the products that are weeks past their best by date. Oftenly, supermarkets freeze the food a couple of days before it goes bad so they can still eat it. The more overdue the product is, the cheaper they make it. It can get to more than 1/2 of the price. Norway claims that the mentioned methods of saving foods help reduce food waste. Another way of preventing food waste was the 0% food waste restaurants that are now open in most of the states in America. If you want to help the problem, please remember to only take the food on your plate that you know you can eat. If you're not sure, you can take some food on your plate and then add more, but don't take too much if you know you're going to throw it out later. Food waste is a serious problem, and you can help by doing this simple thing.
11% of New Yorkers are food insecure. But what does that mean? Food insecurity is defined as the state of being without reliable access to a sufficient quantity of affordable, nutritious food. In the US, 1 in 6 children are food insecure. In New York State, 2 million people did not always have access to food. This was in 2019. And since the COVID-19 pandemic, that number has doubled. Not only is food insecurity negatively impacting our nation, but it isn't hitting all Americans equally. Only about 10% of white Americans are food insecure, and while that statistic is way higher than it should be, 20% of Hispanic and Black Americans are food insecure. Why are these stats higher for people of color than white people? Some ways that we can help to fight food insecurity are obvious: donating to food pantries and volunteering to collect donations. But these really aren't the only ways of helping the cause. You can write to a lawmaker to pass bills that will help end food insecurity, and you can also donate money to a charity. Some charities even donate the food that grocery stores and restaurants reject because they are not aesthetically pleasing enough, and that can help combat food waste and food insecurity at the same time. One specific charity in New York City combating food insecurity is called Meals for Good. Overall, food insecurity is clearly a huge issue that affects so many people in so many communities, and it doesn't necessarily affect us all equally.
A lot of perfectly good food for reasons of its appearance, or just because we find we don't want to eat it. Our food starts as seeds that get water from the farmers and slowly grow and nourish. This helps the plant grow, and it requires the assistance of the sun and decomposers. It feeds off the sun to get energy using a process called photosynthesis. In addition, decomposers, which are organisms, for example worms, eat dead plants and animals, so their waste includes nutrients for the soil. Sadly, all this hard work and process is later wasted. In fact, every year in the US, 40% of good fresh produce is wasted. That's enough to fill 730 football stadiums. There are many reasons that contribute to this. One is that many people tend to overshop and end up wasting most of the food they purchase. We over-exaggerate our estimation in our minds and don't take the time to separate what we need, what we will end up eating, and what will be thrown out. Another is that we as consumers sometimes refrain from buying oddly shaped but still perfectly healthy food. There are, of course, several consequences to this, other than wasting good food, but when the food goes to rot in landfills, it lets out a gas called methane, which occurs due to the fact that the food is decomposing without the assist of air. Methane is a greenhouse gas, which is the type of gases causing climate change. Food waste makes up 6% of global greenhouse emissions, and though it might not seem like it, that is a huge percentage. By wasting our food, we are actually contributing to hurting our planet in an additional way. The bright side is, there are many simple solutions that we can do to reduce our food waste. First, and probably the most simple solution, is of course to compost. Actually, about 35% of Americans are already composting. By doing this, we are giving people like farmers something to nourish and put nutrients into their soil so that they can help grow more. In this case, it's working like a cycle. It goes from us to the farmers and then back to us. While compost is great, not everyone should do it. It is still wasting food that could go to people, so there are also alternative solutions. One is to use smaller plates. This way, we can limit the food we put on our plate and then see how we feel rather than serving ourselves to the maximum capacity from a bigger plate that we might not end up finishing. Another solution is to try to make use of all our food, whether it's unwanted meat or spoiled milk. During the Civil War, there was a limited amount of food, so they had to figure out how to salvage all, if not most of it. There were even ways to save vegetables. For example, they would freeze a lot of food to keep it from going bad until they wanted to eat it. In addition, they would make innovative ways to eat many parts of the animals, like a fried chicken's heart. The key takeaway of this presentation is that there are many solutions to reduce a huge amount of food waste that we are producing, and we should educate ourselves on how we can change our routines and schedules to make this happen.
The psychological effects COVID-19 has made on us as a society and specifically on teenagers. Many teens are experiencing an increase in their sense of isolation, depression, and loneliness. In addition to navigating schoolwork at home, many students have taken on new responsibilities, including childcare, housework, and part-time jobs. This puts additional pressure on teens to use their time and energy in a balanced way, which is already a challenge for the child's brain. It also makes it challenging for these students to keep up with schoolwork and can cause many to fall even further behind. These are only a few of the factors impacting teens as a result of COVID-19. If teens were already using alcohol and/or drugs, they are likely to continue to do so throughout the pandemic. As their stress increases and their access to healthy coping support decreases, they are more at risk for developing substance use disorders. Further crises show that teenagers may develop substance use problems after the crisis has passed. It is important that caring adults stay actively engaged in supporting the child in their life. Much has been written about the impact of COVID-19 on mental health. Experts, communities, and care providers are struggling to plan for the mental health impacts that will result from the pandemic, including possible increase in mental illness and suicide risks. Others have expressed concern about a perfect storm of job losses and social isolation, not to mention an upsurge in anxiety and stress about the threat of the virus itself. It is hard for us to fully understand what will be the overall impact on emotional well-being. However, the pandemic is already taking a profound toll on Americans. In research conducted by the CDC, 40% of the respondents reported increased mental health symptoms as a result of the pandemic. 25% of the respondents aged 18 to 24 reported serious thoughts of suicide in the past 30 days. Before the pandemic, rates of mental health issues among children were already on the rise. Now we can see in addition that the pandemic is having a negative effect on the child's mental health. In one poll, 83% of teens with a history of mental illness said the pandemic was making their condition worse. This was in part due to lack of access to mental health and peer support resources, many of which were obtained throughout schools. We already know that teenagers who are socially isolated or lonely or more likely to become depressed. Loneliness is associated with an increase in both anxiety and depressive symptoms in youth. In addition, there is a reason to be especially concerned about child's isolation from their same age peers. Childhood is a time of forging one's independence and learning to be self reliant. During this time, teens tend to turn to their peers for support more than anyone else. The limited opportunities for social connection imposed by the pandemic can make access to peer support more challenging.
Good morning, fellow classmates. Today I am here to talk to you about food insecurity in America, but more importantly, how you can fight this problem. Now, some of you may be asking yourselves, what is food insecurity? Food insecurity is the state of an economy where not everyone a part of it has a reliable access to food. Some places are lowly affected by this, but America is the most impacted country by this issue. Here are some examples of how this has and continues to affect us. In 2017, over 40 million people struggled with hunger in the United States. That's around 12% of our country's population. And according to the organization Feeding America, just recently, the coronavirus pandemic has left millions of families without stable employment, and more than 50 million people, including 17 million children, may experience food insecurity. That is an insane and unrighteous 15% of all people in America. Now, let me explain the main cause of why this is happening. The main problem is the amount of food we are wasting. According to RTS, Americans discard nearly 40 million tons of food every year. That's 80 billion pounds of food and equates to more than $161 billion, approximately 219 pounds of waste per person, and 30 to 40% of the US food supply. This is just disgusting, knowing that almost half of the food in the US was wasted. Think of all the families that could have not died if someone just didn't waste their food. Now, to end off, I want you to walk away with something you didn't have when I first began talking to you. I want you to know how to fight against this cause and to help America before this crisis gets too out of control. You can spread awareness by making social media posts, talking to friends about it, or even hanging up informational signs all around the city. Overall, you should always try to make as many people not aware of the issue aware. And eventually, one day we will all realize that we have to be more cautious when choosing how much food we purchase.
If you want to go even a step further, try involving yourself with hydroponics. By this, I mean instead of getting your whole food supply from markets and grocery stores, try buying a mini hydroponics kit. By doing this, you will be able to replant the seeds of the food you eat instead of throwing the food out immediately when you are done like you're maybe used to. If you are eating any fruit or any food with seeds, always remember to replant those seeds, which will practically allow you to have an infinite source of that one food. If you do not want to do this, you can actually help in other ways by just showing support for local greenhouses, which are farms that reuse water and basically have an infinite supply of seeds, by either donating or telling more people about them.
Over the course of this pandemic, we have seen many changes in the world, especially in the US. Our country has been dealing with food deprivation for a while, but it is more than ever in these times, especially for people who are less fortunate. Food waste is a big problem contributing to food deprivation and being able to nourish our community equally. In the US alone, there are 40.7 million tons of food waste wasted every year. That is equivalent to 180,000 Statue of Liberties. Globally, we waste 1.3 billion tons, which is 1/3 of all the food produced for human consumption. That means the United States alone contributes to 4% of the entire world's food waste. This could be helping nourish our community and give to the people who don't have access to food resources such as supermarkets, yet we choose not to. 9.2% of the US population lives in poverty. That is 34 million people. Access to food resources, we can help give back to the people. A way we can do this is buying only what you think we can eat. Or save our leftovers. Donate to food drives and or store food correctly. As a country in whole, we can donate extra waste that would otherwise end up in places like landfills, or create a way to have a place to put extra food so food doesn't get cluttered in landfills.